Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. In today's episode, we're going deep on vitamin D. And you might be surprised to learn that what you think you know about it could be totally wrong. We're going way beyond, like, the basic good for your bones
Uh-huh.
thing and really exploring the latest research. This research is revealing some pretty fascinating insights, including a shift in medical guidelines that's causing, like, a lot of debate in the health world.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting, right? Like we're seeing this move away from recommending vitamin D supplements even when people have low levels.
Yeah, that's wild. Like, we've always been told that vitamin D is, like, essential, right?
Yeah.
So what gives? Why are these recommendations changing?
Well, imagine a society that's completely afraid of water. They only take like tiny sips, convinced that anything more is dangerous. And so researchers in this society, they do studies comparing those tiny sips to slightly larger sips, and they find no difference in health outcomes. So they conclude that, you know what, more water is just unnecessary.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. Are you saying that the research on vitamin D has been, like, flawed?
Not necessarily flawed, but maybe a little limited. You see, historically, a lot of studies have used very low doses of vitamin D supplements. And these low doses, well, they might not be enough to actually see all the benefits. It's kind of like those tiny sips of water you were talking about, right? You're not going to really see the benefits unless you're properly hydrated.
So are you saying that we're potentially under vitamin D as, like, a whole society? And if so, what does that even mean for our overall health?
It's definitely a possibility worth considering. I mean, the more we look into the research, the more we see that vitamin D plays a part in way more than just bone health. We're talking about a nutrient that's involved in, immunity, cardiovascular health, neurological function, even things like genetic expression.
Wow, I had no idea. But I got to ask, if vitamin D is so crucial, why are medical guidelines, like, shifting away from supplementation? Isn't there enough evidence to support, like, having higher levels?
Well, more research is always a good thing. But even existing studies, even the smaller ones, they already suggest there are some pretty significant benefits to maintaining optimal vitamin D levels. But what's interesting is that the lack of those large-scale, definitive studies might be due to a lack of interest from, pharmaceutical companies.
Wait, what do pharmaceutical companies have to do with vitamin D?
Well, think about it. Unlike a new drug, there's no patent on sunlight or food, right? Those are the main sources of vitamin D. So there's just less of a financial incentive for those companies to pour money into researching something that they can't really patent and sell as a medication.
Okay, that makes sense. So we have this essential nutrient that potentially has, like, huge implications for our health, but research is kind of limited because, there's not a huge profit to be made.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex issue for sure, and it really shows how we need more independent research on vitamin D.
Totally. Okay, so let's talk about those primary sources of vitamin D you mentioned. Sunlight and food. Now, I remember hearing about a popular supplement called hydroferrol, and I've even seen it, like, prescribed by doctors in certain countries. So what's up with that?
So hydroferrol, also known as calcidiol, is a little different from native vitamin D3, which is what our bodies actually make from sunlight. It's actually a pre-hormone, of vitamin D. And while it can be really helpful, especially for people who have liver issues, it only gives you one specific metabolite of vitamin D. Now, native D3, on the other hand, that results in, a wide range of different metabolites, so it could potentially have like broader benefits.
So is hydroferrol something we should be concerned about? Should we be, like, avoiding it?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, it's important to know the difference, but in the end, the best way to choose a supplement is to talk to a healthcare professional. They can really assess your individual needs, look at your health history, and help you make the right decision.
Got it. So checking labels is crucial. We want to be sure that our supplements contain cholecalciferol, that's D3, not D2, which, from what I've heard, is just less effective.
Exactly. Now, when we talk about absorption, it's important to mention a connection that many people often overlook. It's the connection between magnesium and vitamin D.
Oh, this is something I can totally relate to. I've dealt with low vitamin D, even though I take supplements and I get some sun.
You're definitely not alone there. A lot of people don't realize that magnesium actually plays a big part in how our bodies absorb and use vitamin D. If you're low on magnesium, it can actually hinder how well vitamin D works. And unfortunately, a lot of common things like stress, drinking coffee, even being exposed to aluminum can deplete those magnesium stores.
Oh, interesting. I do love my coffee, but I hate to hear that it could be, like, messing with my vitamin D. So even if we're, taking our supplements and getting a little sun, we could still be missing out if our magnesium is low.
That's exactly right. It's all about understanding how these essential nutrients work together. And this actually brings up another common question. Can we get enough vitamin D from food alone? What about like fish, seafood, mushrooms, eggs? Are they really enough?
That's a great question. It seems like every day there's a new study about the best food sources for vitamin D. It's hard to know what to believe.
Yeah, it can definitely be confusing, especially with how modern farming practices impact the amount of vitamin D in our food. For example, did you know that wild-caught salmon can have up to like 5 times more vitamin D than the farmed kind? This is because of the differences in what they eat.
Wow, that is a huge difference. I honestly had no idea. So I guess choosing wild-caught over farmed is, like, key when it comes to getting more vitamin D.
Exactly. And here's another interesting tip. If you expose commercially grown mushrooms to a little bit of sunlight after they're harvested, you can significantly boost their vitamin D content.
Now, that is fascinating. I'm definitely going to try that. So it sounds like there are ways we can, like, optimize the vitamin D in the food we eat, even if we buy it at the store. But even if we eat a diet full of vitamin D-rich foods, a lot of us still struggle to get those optimal levels.
Yeah.
And that brings us to sun exposure, which, always seems to come with conflicting advice. It feels like we're constantly hearing different things about the sun. Some people say we should avoid it completely, while others say it's super beneficial. It's tough to know what to believe.
You're right. It's really about finding that sweet spot, that balance. Too much sun exposure, especially without protection, can be harmful. But if we avoid the sun altogether, we miss out on its benefits. Benefits like vitamin D production. It's about, building up your tolerance gradually, exposing larger areas of your skin for shorter amounts of time.
So that whole idea of just exposing a little bit of skin, like your hands and face, is that enough? Or is that a myth?
Yeah, that's pretty much a myth. If you want to produce vitamin D optimally, you really need to maximize that surface area. And don't forget about the morning and evening sun. It's a much gentler way to get those rays.
Why is the morning and evening sun gentler? What makes those times of day so special?
Well, the angle of the sun during those times means that we're actually getting more infrared light. And infrared light has been shown to have a lot of protective benefits for our skin and, our overall health. It's like a natural shield against any potential damage from those UV rays.
That makes sense. I've always noticed that I feel more energized and like just overall better after spending time in the morning or evening sun. So it seems like we do need a little bit of sun exposure to produce vitamin D, but it's all about doing it safely and smartly, right?
Exactly. Now, it's super important to remember that there's a difference between what's considered a sufficient vitamin D level and what's optimal. While labs often say that 30 NNGLE is good enough, it might be better to aim a little higher, maybe around 50 NMLs or even more, especially when it comes to things like immune function, pregnancy health, and even managing pain.
So it's not just about like getting by, it's about really thriving, right?
Yeah.
And to thrive, we need to kind of shift away from that bare minimum thinking when it comes to vitamin D.
Exactly. We got to be proactive with our health and make sure we're getting enough of this, essential nutrient.
Okay, so let's say we're aiming for these optimal levels.
Yeah.
How much vitamin D should we actually be getting? I mean, I know it probably depends on individual stuff like needs and lifestyle.
Yeah, of course. It's definitely not one size fits all, but as like a general rule of thumb, around 4,000 to 5,000 IU of vitamin D3 per day is a pretty safe place to start for most adults. Taking it with some fat in the morning can also help your body absorb it better, but, it's always best to talk to your doctor or a healthcare provider to get recommendations that are specifically for you. They'll look at your health history and your lab results and all that good stuff.
It feels like we've covered a lot of ground already. But before we move on, are there any like common myths or misconceptions about vitamin D that you think we should clear up?
One thing I hear a lot is that high doses of vitamin D are like a cure-all for everything. And while vitamin D is super important for many different functions in the body, it's not a magic bullet, right? And we need to be realistic about what it can do and approach supplementation with a balanced view.
Right, so it's about understanding the role of vitamin D within a bigger picture of health, not thinking of it as a quick fix.
Mm.
What about just relying solely on supplements for our vitamin D needs? Is that a good idea?
Not really. Supplements can definitely be helpful, especially during those winter months when there's less sun or for people who, maybe can't get outside much or have problems absorbing vitamin D. But they shouldn't be the only thing you rely on. The best approach is always to get vitamin D from multiple sources, like sunlight and your diet.
It's all about that balance again, right? Supplements are a tool, but they work best as part of a healthy lifestyle.
Exactly. And this brings up another important point. Everyone's different. We can't just assume that everyone absorbs and uses vitamin D in the same way. Things like your genetics, how old you are, your skin pigmentation, even the health of your gut, all those things can affect how your body handles vitamin D.
That makes total sense. So what works for one person might not work for another, right? This really emphasizes why it's so important to get advice from a healthcare provider and to check your levels regularly with blood tests.
Absolutely. It's all about working with your doctor to find that sweet spot. The perfect balance between sun exposure, what you're eating, and maybe some supplements to get to those optimal vitamin D levels we talked about.
Speaking of monitoring our levels, are there any signs or symptoms that could indicate a vitamin D deficiency? Something we could look out for in ourselves or our family members?
Well, those deficiency symptoms can be pretty subtle, and it's easy to mistake them for something else. But some common ones to watch out for are, feeling tired all the time, muscle weakness, bone pain, mood swings, and even your wounds taking longer to heal.
It's kind of amazing how not having enough of one nutrient can show up in so many different ways.
It really is. It just shows you how interconnected everything is in the body and how one system can impact another. A vitamin D deficiency doesn't just affect your bones, it can affect your mood, your energy, even how well you recover from injuries.
This whole deep dive has really opened my eyes to just how important vitamin D is. It's clearly so much more than just, something that builds strong bones.
Yeah, it's a major player in all sorts of things your body does, like immune function, cardiovascular health, even mental well being.
It makes you wonder what other, seemingly basic things could be having a huge impact on our health without us even realizing it.
That's a great question. I mean, we're still learning so much about the human body and how all the pieces fit together. That's what makes this field so exciting. There's always something new to discover.
This episode has definitely made me way more curious about vitamin D. I'm already thinking about how I can optimize my levels and make sure I'm getting enough.
That's awesome. It's all about giving yourself the knowledge to take control of your health.
Speaking of knowledge, are there any resources or tools that our listeners can use to learn more about vitamin D and maybe get those personalized recommendations we talked about? Where can they go to keep this deep dive going on their own?
There are definitely some fantastic resources out there, both online and offline. Organizations like the Vitamin D Council and the Endocrine Society, they have tons of evidence-based information and guidelines. And of course, talking to a knowledgeable healthcare provider is always the best bet for getting advice that's specific to you and coming up with a plan that fits your needs.
That's great advice. It's always smart to talk to a professional before making any big changes to your diet or, starting any new supplements. This deep dive has been absolutely amazing. We've covered so much, from the science behind vitamin D to practical tips for optimizing our levels. I feel like I have a completely new understanding of this essential nutrient. I bet our listeners are feeling just as informed and empowered as I am. So, before we wrap things up, is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with? Any last thoughts or insights on vitamin D?
It really strikes me that something as simple as vitamin D, something we can get from, just being out in the sun and from the food we eat, can have such a huge impact on our health and how we feel. It really shows how connected everything is in our bodies. And it's like, even small changes can make a big difference.
That's so true. It's a good reminder to pay attention to those little things, like making sure we get enough sunshine or choosing wild-caught salmon instead of the farmed kind. Those choices might seem small, but they can really add up and have a positive effect on our overall health.
Exactly. And it's, never too late to start making those changes. It doesn't matter if you're just starting to learn about vitamin D or you've been researching it for a while. There's always more to discover and explore.
So that makes it so interesting, right? It's an ongoing journey of learning and discovery.
Absolutely. And I encourage everyone to, stay curious, keep asking questions, and always talk to their doctor or healthcare provider to figure out what works best for them.
Well said. This has been an amazing deep dive into the world of vitamin D. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And to all our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you learned something new today and feel inspired to take charge of your health. And remember, this is just the beginning. If this deep dive sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to keep exploring. There's a whole world of information out there just waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep those vitamin D levels optimized.